If you have been to elementary school, high school, you would have realized that there is no progress without friction. But when we start working in corporate life, we forget this basic principle that friction is actually good for progress. I often always say that if there is no resistance to the proposal or plan, it is doomed to fail because people are just giving lip service to it and they don't actually believe in it. I have seen this play out in almost 30 years of my career, every year, multiple times, and so many times that, and multiple war stories. Some I lost, some I won. But the principle I have learned is that friction is actually extremely important. Friction and resistance is actually extremely important for any useful progress in anything. Hi, friends. My name is Anshuman Tiwari. This is your podcast, Manage Better. This is episode number 101, 101. Right? With your love and affection and continued support, I've been able, almost 4 years, I've been able to do over 100 episodes now. This is 101st. Almost 95% of them being LinkedIn Lives. So we are welcome to once again another LinkedIn Live. Do me a favor, if you are on LinkedIn or on YouTube, just let me know if this is working. I can see that the feed is working fantastically well, but technology is technology, and sometimes what you think is happening is not actually happening. So just drop me a note, tell me whether this is working. Meanwhile, I'll get started with the show. So today's show, you might have understood from the opening comments that it is about difficult conversations, the conversations that many nice people or the quote is actually about nice men, but I will expand that quote to all genders, inclusive. But nice people or nice men actually stay away from confrontation. And this is one of the reasons why many so called nice men, nice people actually don't progress in their career beyond a point because they are always avoiding confrontation, they are avoiding difficult situations, they stay away from difficult conversations, and hence are not able to progress beyond a point. I'm not saying, of course, that if you fight with everybody every day, you will make progress because that's also not feasible, right? I have Vikas and Charu telling me that the LinkedIn feed is working, so thank you both. And I can already see that the YouTube feed is also working, and today's feed is also going live on our guest Aalok Gupta's feed. So coming to the guest, Alok is a dear friend from my HSBC days, and today is way ahead in his career, and I'm glad and delighted that he still remembers me and has happily agreed to be on this show once again. He is the second person on this entire 101 to be repeated on the show. So the first one was Abhijit Baduri, and Alok is the second one. He is currently CEO, coach, and managing partner with LSF Global in Hong Kong. The firm is based out of Hong Kong but operates globally. And he's a seasoned CEO coach currently with LSF. Like I said, almost 30 years of diverse experience. Our careers are similar in some ways, um, except the money that he makes. So we will quiz him on that. But he successfully reinvented his career multiple times. I've known his days when he was a hotelier, then management consultant, banker. Of course, in the last several years, as a HR professional and career coach or executive coach, because spans across leadership as well. Currently spends a lot of time with CEO coaching and being a board director. And like I said, he's been in HR and related fields. Global impact, very popular across the globe. Before the session went live, pre-live, he was telling me about his daily charge, and I fell off my chair. So feel lucky those who are attending this live. Thousands of dollars of worth wisdom free. With that, I will bring Alok, my friend, to the stream. Namaste, Alok ji. How are you?
Very good, and thank you for having me here, Anshuman.
My pleasure always. And like I said, it's a delight to welcome a guest back, and you are only the second one. So I've had this pleasure only twice. Thank you also for reigniting your social media journey with this. I hear that you took a small break and you are back with this podcast. So glad that you chose this one.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, say if you consider 3 years small, yes, it was small. break. uh, and it was fairly conscious because somehow I felt the energy was being sucked in. In fact, I liked your comment that some people do social media for followers, and I think you don't do that. I don't do that. And I wanted to kind of reset my brain that why do I need to do social media? So that was a 3 years hibernation, and now that I'm back, thank you for having me. I think there's no better way to make a comeback. And then with Anshuman Tiwari, because Anshuman, what really inspired me about your work is consistency. And this is something I want to tell the audience who are listening or will listen, that success is not about hard work, it's about consistent work. A lot of people run fast like the rabbit, but if you give up when you're about to hit that tipping point, that is not going to be a good thing, Anshuman. So keep doing this. Very happy to be here at your 101 episode.
Thank you very much, and also for the kind words. But I get this question these days quite a lot. That 100 is a lot. How did you get there? So I keep saying that do the first one, do the second one, do the third one, and you will get to 100. So there is no other secret. Of course, you learn along the way, and the process and the guests and everything changes.
Yeah.
Okay, with that introduction, quickly jumping into the content for the day. We plan to talk for about 55 minutes. Five are done. The general pattern, of course, is that I have some prepared questions for you, Alok, and we will also welcome some questions from the audience, and which usually around midway I will start taking, and I will pose those
Sure.
questions to you. That's pretty much the format, easy-going format, no surprise
Mm.
option. Okay. So, and to the audience, I can remind that you can actually drop in your questions even now if you want, but I will only take the questions a little later. So, getting started, Alok, I think the first obvious question for all of us is that what is a difficult conversation? Everybody talks about a difficult conversation. In a long career, I have seen quite a few. My way of looking at it is that, I start sweating, the hair on my back of my neck stands up, my heartbeat goes up, and you can call it anxiety, nervousness, and what all. But these are layman's views. You are an expert in this field with thousands of people you've coached, and large organizations, small organizations, individuals, CEOs, everybody. What is a difficult conversation when Alok sees one?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, I mean, say difficult conversation is something in a nutshell you can't live without. So,
Hmm.
whether you are in family, whether you're in work, and when two human beings meet, there's bound to, and I'm going to borrow your word, Anshuman, friction, right? And that's a difficult conversation. Now, let's try to understand what makes it difficult, right? So, I'm going to leave you with two words, very simple. Two words, what makes a difficult conversation? And let's start with the simple word first. What is a simple word? Logical. Now, some people find not being logical, or a person who's not able to understand you and it's not following a progressive logical flow is being difficult. But they're not, that could be an IQ problem. And this is what I would call a lesser difficult conversation. Now, majority of the people find the emotional conversations difficult. The reason is very simple, because they're not trained to manage emotions. And I would quote Sadhguru on this. I would say he's the most viral guru on the social media, that if you don't know how to manage your own emotions, how do you manage emotions of others? And that's where the problem lies. So in short, Anshuman, logic does make a difficult conversation at times, but this is less of a difficult conversation because it's a little bit easier to follow logic and make it solvable. But then when emotions come at play and people who don't know how to manage their personal or other people's emotion, that makes it complicated, and that conversation takes a very different turn.
Hmm. So, logical and emotional, of course, in most situations, logical, you can logic against a logic, right? So you can have a discussion around
Yes.
that. But
Yes.
emotion against an emotion makes it even worse. So
Absolutely.
not any better. But so I get that point. And referring to some books. I know one of my favorites on this topic is Gary Patterson's Crucial Conversations. He also talks about this, that, like you said, it has to be done. And many times in
Yeah.
corporate life, we find that people actually avoid that conversation. And so, from your, maybe experience, what are the types of conversations that people usually avoid and they should not?
Yeah.
And then we will peel the onion a little bit and go deeper.
Absolutely. No, and let me just kind of supplement to the point you made. That's a very good point.
Uh,
Logic against logic, emotion against emotion. The problem happens when you try to use logic with emotions.
mm,
So one person is emotional. So imagine this. So you did mention I've done many kind of reinventions, and I'll tell you my hotel days. When I would have a guest who is kind of shouting on the top of his voice, that person is absolutely emotional. Now, if I was to use logic at that point of time, then clearly it's going to backfire and we're going to have a problem. So you can't really solve an emotional problem with logic. You need to let that emotion kind of settle down first. So whether you kind of calm the guest down, let him kind of talk his mind out, or give him a chair, give him a glass of water, get him a wine glass, whatever you do, you need to let that emotion settle down first. And then when the person is ready to receive that logic you have to offer, now is the time to give logic. So you made a beautiful point. I really love that, Anshuman, that you can't really use an emotion when and against logic, and logic and emotion. So that's one point I want to make. Now, in terms of like what are different type of conversation, your second question, which people are scared to have, this is when you don't have a mastery, or you don't have much control over your own emotions. Because what will happen is, let's take an example. So other day I was having a performance conversation with a colleague, and this person start talking about growth without offering much logic. Now, I worked hard, I want growth, but then I can't offer much logic to why I want that growth. And that kind of gets ticked off. Now, if I get emotional because the person was not substantiating his claim, then clearly that would turn very easily into an argument. So, this is something which you want to try and catch. So, every conversation starts with a discussion. Gradually, that discussion turns into an argument. That argument can turn into a conflict, and that's when you kind of burn bridges or relationships. So it's kind of a very logical flow. That's how you get. So what I want to recommend people who are scared of having difficult conversation, which can get emotional, apart from having self mastery, try and observe when that your conversation is going from discussion to debate is okay, stay, continue. But when it start turning into an argument, still stay, but stop when you see signs of conflict. The moment you see kind of signs of conflict, you got to diffuse. So that is what I would like to offer people who are scared of having difficult conversation, Anshuman. And I can safely tell you, it's not fun to have conflicts. And no matter how strong a personality you are, no matter how much you can give to the person in front of you in terms of reprimanding, scolding, getting away with it, it doesn't feel nice. The strongest of the person, including, I would say, Donald Trump, who's used to fighting people every day, maybe, and I can guarantee you, you can't sleep well when you kind of pull the person down. So it's not fun to have a conflict, but difficult conversations are important because you need to get work done.
or in some cases, like I said earlier, you need a message to be given
Yes.
across, and in no uncertain terms.
Yeah.
And there is, uh, maybe, for example, in performance discussions, and you've managed so many of them. Having run large teams, I have also, in my own small way, had these performance conversations, and find quite often that hints don't work with some
Yeah.
people. So if
Yeah.
hint is not working for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, what do you do? So there will be a difficult conversation at the end of the expiry
Yeah.
date of the thing. And
Absolutely.
that is one of the um, one of the reasons why difficult conversations are difficult. They have to be done.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is, of course, a good start. We've established some ground and understood what these conversations are, and one or two examples also we shared. And we are trying to keep it corporate wide, but some of these lessons are also applicable to outside of work situations as well. But we'll not
Yes.
go there.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't want to get sued on so for uh,
But talking of corporate, can I just offer a very
sure,
fun
sure, sure,
analogy? So
sure.
Anshuman, I want to offer the trend which is riding everyone by storm, AI, right?
Hmm.
Now, one reason why people love AI is because there's no emotional problems there, right? Today, if managers or CEOs given a choice, they would get 90% robots to work for them because there's no emotional hangups. And Anshuman, you made a very interesting point in the beginning, right? That people don't want to have this emotional conversation, but they must do it. But it is a very fine balance you need to maintain. And therefore, today, people need to know when to stop. Right. So I give one story of an example of an employee which I used to really love. So this guy did amazing job for 3 years, and then in the fourth year, the person started getting disengaged, and the conversation were not only difficult, they were emotional. They were so emotional to an extent where the language started becoming petty. And then obviously, you know what the story is. The person got a warning, the warning then turned into a replacement and a redundancy. So people don't know when to stop. And when they don't know when to stop with a difficult conversation, they burn the relationship. In short, they burn their jobs. Anshuman.
Yeah, yeah, I think I was pondering over, and in my now long career, I could actually single out three, four such cases, exactly the same cases, where stars turned into um, difficult situations
Yeah.
because they were unable to handle. And what is also true, Alok, and you know this as a leadership or a CEO coach as well, that as you get senior, the pyramid is so narrow at the top. In
Yeah.
spite of best performance, best potential, best everything,
Mm.
somebody else might be that 1% better than you, or may have some additional ability, and may move ahead. And this actually breaks quite a lot of people on their way up, and then they turn to this emotional thing that the world is against me and the universe has conspired against me and so on. Anyway,
Exactly.
this is one common area, but it really starts kicking in a little when you get a little senior. But
Yeah.
just trying to keep the conversation more wide spectrum. So we took an example of a performance discussion, right? So what, let's say a manager has to convey this. We'll take your example and partly the example that I share, that the manager has to convey that this team member has performed poorly or over a period of time has been performing poorly. And let's assume for a moment that the employee in this case is
Yeah.
highly hypersensitive and emotional in nature, which makes the conversation difficult.
Yeah.
For a moment, we'll assume that the manager has the skills required, which is not always the case, but we have to make some assumptions. How would you, as a coach, help such a manager have this conversation in a manner in which it is useful for the organization?
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's a great question. How do we kind of have a difficult conversation? And there are a lot of frameworks. If you Google, if you YouTube, you'll find a lot of ways to do that. I'm not going to teach all of that. I'm going to give you something which is very practical and very easy to remember. So let's kind of start with the first thing, purpose. You need to be very clear that what is the purpose, what is the message, what is the outcome you want to give and achieve at the end of that conversation. It has to be crystal clear. Don't even walk into a meeting, don't even start the second stage, which is preparation, unless you're clear with your purpose. Now let me give you some examples. So taking an example from you, Anshuman, where you mentioned that the person is not behaving well, not performing well. Now, that's something where he needs to be given a hard message. In that hard message, we can't be mincing words. So clearly, it won't be nice. The outcome has to be the person has to feel a little bit conscious, potentially a little bit scared of his behavior or her behavior. So that's a clear purpose for a person who's not really performing to that optimum. That is one example. Let's take one more example. Now, this person is putting a lot of efforts, a great attitude, but not able to get the results which are needed. This is a person where you need to have a developmental conversation. You need to have a conversation which can help this person find opportunities to grow, develop skill set. Now, there the outcome has to be action plan for his development. So that is the first step. We need to be absolutely clear with the purpose you're trying to achieve in that conversation. Once you've done that, you need to do your homework. Now, that homework is absolutely critical. Sometimes I don't get time to do my homework, but I still invest that 5 minutes to put my thoughts down on paper. Now, even if you don't have that time, because as you go up the ladder, the number of meetings you're going to have is going to be much more higher. Prepare while you're having that conversation. Always carry a pen and a paper. This is your best tool. Now, a lot of people have stopped using pen. I've seen that, especially in the younger generation. It's a very limiting move because you're going to talk things which maybe are not structured. A bigger danger is you're going to forget the main points. So always use a pen and write it. So preparation is key. Prepare before and prepare in the conversation. So that's the second thing I want you to remember. Prepare, prepare, prepare. Now, when you are in the conversation, please throw your preparation out of the window. It's not a memory test. You're not back to school or primary school. You're going to refer your notes and going to do it. Yes, use them, but go with the flow. And it's absolutely critical. And I use a very interesting analogy: empty the cup. Empty the person in front of you, his brain, before you start talking. And one word for you to remember in the conversation is dialogue. Please don't have a monologue, because if you're having a monologue, you won't get whether the person is receiving your information. You won't get feedback whether it is effective or not. So have a dialogue, don't have a monologue. And the last thing I want to suggest is please end up with a clear message or a clear action plan. So if we take the two situations or two examples I gave you, number one, very clear purpose. There's nothing more important than that. I have seen enough people enter meetings and conversation without clarity in their mind what they want to achieve. Number two, you need to prepare. Even if you spend 5 minutes or 2 minutes to prepare, please prepare. And if you don't have any time, prepare in the meeting while having the conversation. Number three, in the conversation, have a dialogue, not a monologue. And finally, please have a solid outcome, a conclusive outcome, which could be an action plan or it could be a clear message. So those are the four very practical, progressive, logically progressive steps I want to give you. Well, while it's not important that you kind of do all the step in every conversation, but in my line, in my work, I have always followed these four steps and they work like magic.
Absolutely. I loved, I was making notes while you were talking. So, but I love the writing part because quite often, and we see this every day in a corporate job because, like you said, you are often running from meeting to meeting,
Yeah.
and after a while you are thinking, which meeting is this, and what are you doing here? So, but these crucial conversations or these difficult conversations should not be those meetings where you are landing and then thinking why you have landed. It does happen in a busy day that there will be some other meetings, but these meetings definitely need a little bit more preparation, like you said. And we owe it to the people who are coming to the meeting. So, assuming that, like in the example we discussed, that if I'm the manager and there is a team member, irrespective of the performance and any message that we have to deliver, the person owes, or we owe the person a fair hearing. Good. So we've come this far, almost midway. But So to my audience, some of you have already posted questions. We will take them now, but some of the questions, but you can keep posting questions. I will, try and bring them into the feed. We'll see a question from Tarun Kohli. I will put it on screen, Alok, for you. But Tarun is a regular, I would say, attendee of these series, and his question is around what role does listening play in making difficult conversations becoming effective ones? You did mention briefly in when you were talking about dialogue, but I think this is a slightly specific question, so let's take it that way.
Absolutely. No, Tarun, thank you for that question. In fact, uh, it's not a what, it's potentially the biggest role plays in a conversation, in a dialogue. And let's kind of understand the psychology of listening first. One of the things which we have a big problem in conversation that, and I'm going to use a very controversial term over here, 90% people don't listen. Why they don't listen? Because they're thinking about their next response. They're thinking about their preparation. They're thinking about judgment. And when you're doing that, you can't really listen carefully. So listening and talking cannot happen at the same time. Do remember that. Those of us who do that, we call it mental chatter. So the short answer to your question, it plays the biggest role. But I want to give you a very powerful tip, and please try to catch this if you can. Now, do not listen for the what the person is saying. That is easy. Those are words. Listen for what the person is not saying. What does that mean? That also is known as reading between the lines. Sometimes people don't know why they're acting that way, right? Let's take an example. So other day I had a person who was kind of really acting very funny, very weird. She was kind of absolutely not behaving normally, and this continued for actually 3 4 days. And when I tried to have that conversation with the person, and it was a difficult conversation, see, she is someone who would never talk back to me. She's someone who would never say, okay, if you want to fire me, fire me. Now, those are the kind of comments she mentioned. So I immediately know something is off, right? So I ended up with a warning, please don't do that, because she was burning bridges here and there. And then she went on leave. Now, after 2 days, she became absolutely normal, the lovely person she was. And that's an example was because I listened to something she was not saying. Even she did not know that some emotion is driving her crazy and doing things which are illogical, not helpful, and burning bridges everywhere. Now, had I taken a impulsive decision to maybe fire her, that wouldn't be helpful, because that was a temporary phenomena. Just because I was listening for what she was not saying, I managed to save a very good employee. So that's an example, Tarun. I hope that's helpful on how important listening is.
Well, that's a fantastic example, Alok, because and for people in corporate life, particularly as you get a little senior, mid-senior levels, this is a very common situation that people and they have, and this happens to us also. I'm saying they as a matter of speaking, but I mean
Yeah.
we are also the they. So often we say things that we don't truly mean, or and the words we choose are not the best options, and
Mm.
it comes out very very differently. And in any case, in communication, I often say that it's not what launches, it is what lands. So you may
Yeah.
say whatever you think, but if something else lands, um, and it's a complicated situation. So thank you, Tarun. Yes, fantastic question. We'll take one more, and then also take some of the questions that I have prepared. And Alok, this answer that you shared reminded me of our first or previous episode that we recorded. So for
Mhm.
those who are attending and may not know, the Alok was, I think, my fourth or fifth guest, if I'm getting the numbers right. And that was a recorded show. We could not find the live session, a common time slot. But that was a recorded show, and it was one of the better shows. It is still the number one watched show on my YouTube channel. Uh, Many may not know that the same show goes on YouTube as well. But Alok's episode on effective communication is still the number one show on my YouTube channel, and even after almost 4 years, that was July or August of 2020, so 3.5 certainly. I will drop a link of that show in this chat as well, so that those who are interested in gaining from Alok's experience and wisdom can see. And then you can tell me, is he any better after 4 years or the same? You'll see that. I certainly know that.
Some white hair.
Yeah, some white, some white. Yeah.
But you beat me on that.
Oh, this is my brand now, Alok. So
Absolutely.
even if I want, I can't take away this hair or color it now because people will chew me for that. But coming back to this conversation, let's take one more question from Rishabh.
Hmm.
Um, and thank you, Rishabh, for your question. But his question is around how to navigate difficult conversation with employees, how to remain neutral, assuming you have to remain neutral while taking career-related decision for employees in the company. So it's a slightly specific scenario, but anything for Rishabh, Alok?
No, I think that's a brilliant question, which he's asking, right, Rishabh? Thank you for that. Uh, and let me see if I interpret your question right, because there's quite a lot of things between the lines and for the audience to benefit as well. How to navigate difficult conversation with employees, essentially what I interpret is you're talking about different kind of employees, right? And then the second part, which is kind of related, is how to remain neutral while making career decisions for them. Now, clearly I think you're talking about biases. You're talking about a bias which could be a favorite employee. You're talking about a bias which could be an employee which you don't like because of certain reason. Either ways, there's a bias at play. Now, it is difficult because do remember that, Rishabh, that human beings are born biased. Now, no matter how much I tell you that, don't favor a family member, you will favor a family member. No matter how much I tell you, don't favor the call from your mom or your dad, you will, because we are born biased. Now, how do we manage this? And I'm sure all of us must have at some point gone through unconscious bias training. You can't really kind of remove the bias completely, but what you should try to do in order to be neutral is to add objectivity. And let's take an example to understand the point of objectivity here. If you don't like that employee because of the way the person looks or whether the person talks, because the person has a certain culture, character, now you're getting personal. That is something which we need to avoid. So we need to make sure that we stay objective. Now, there are three rules which you can adopt to stay objective and stay neutral while talking to employees or making any kind of decisions for them. Number one, don't give them a title. What is a title? Lazy is a title. Misbehavior is a title. This person is always complacent is a title. Always look at the characteristics and not the character. So if you label the person, then your judgment will always be biased towards making a decision for that person. So don't give them a title of being complacent. Don't give them a title of being lazy. Try to talk about when he was complacent. Try to talk about instead the action when he was misbehaving. So tackle the action, not the character. So that is number one rule. Number two rule is to collect evidence to make a factual decision, because sometimes emotions will take over. Don't let your emotions take over, rather use your logic. This is a case where you need to kind of make a list of the facts you have against that person, or something which will help you kind of make a neutral decision for that person. And the last thing, if your doubt still doesn't go after all that evidence collection and trying to be neutral and not being judgmental, is take feedback. Try to go to a third party, a coach, a mentor, even your wife, that, this is what I'm thinking, what do you feel? And that third person dialogue will suddenly open up your brains to be neutral. So those are three things I want to offer you, Rishabh. It's not easy. I can promise you all of us have biases. It's just that we need to stay conscious and stay objective, and these are three ways, Rishabh, you can be conscious and objective when you think about employee careers.
And if I may add, Alok, this is about career, so obviously every precaution that we can take, we must, because
Yeah.
one lack, if somebody's career is in difficulty or is sabotaged because of our lack of preparation or empathy or uh, depth, then that would be quite disastrous. Thank you once again, Rishabh. I'll take, there are some very good questions coming in, Alok, so I will dump my questions and go to the audience questions.
Sure.
Um, Vikas is a top voice, a fellow top voice, and he's been on this show as well. So thank you, Vikas, first of all, for joining. And his question is about how do you counter power dynamics in difficult conversations? Boss, subordinate is a power dynamic situation, or a customer situation where a service provider, vendor, these kind of. How do you counter if assuming that there is a need to counter that? Anything
Yeah.
for us?
No, absolutely, Vikas, and that's kind of very common, right? So you always have situations where people try to assert their power. Now, sometimes you have a loud voice in the room which will try to assert the power. Sometimes you have a boss which will try to assert power with their management level, and sometimes you have a client which try to assert power because that person is client. So again, there are many psychological tactics over here. Now, personally, I run actually a program called strategic articulation, which is a step-by-step process to kind of make sure that you are always the driver. So here's a phrase which I want you to remember, and hopefully you'll never forget this because it's so catchy, that if you use a particular process, you can always be a driver in any conversation, even though you're not the chair. 10 people in the room, two people in the room, you can always drive a conversation, but you must not let that person know it. That is something I want you to know. Now, obvious question which comes up, how do you be a driver? So one of the thing I want to offer you is context. This is a magic word which has changed my life. I learned this word from my coach, business coach called Chris Dion. If he ever watches this, maybe credit to him for teaching me that. Context is not background. Context is why you are having conversation in the first place. So every time a person digresses, and normally when people get emotional, when try to exert power, get back to the context. So let's take an example. So you're having a conversation with the boss where you need the boss to approve a head count, and the boss start exerting power. Last time you took the head count, nothing was produced. Now why you want another head count? Now say, boss, which head count? That one is old story. Can we talk about this one? Now, again, you don't need to use dynamic power over here. What you need to use is a technique. And the best technique after context, which is bringing them back to why you're there, the purpose of the meeting, questioning. Now, do remember there are multiple questions or techniques to use, and I'm going to just give you one or two techniques which you can use to remove that exertion of power. The first thing, what I want to tell you is not to use ever with a boss or someone who has more power you, is interrogative questioning. What does that mean? Well, if you look at those spy shows and those police shows where they interrogate a spy or interrogate a criminal, that is interrogative technique. Now, in India, in China, uh, actually in many countries, I do see bosses use interrogative technique. Oh, where's the report? I asked you to do that yesterday. Why didn't it happen yesterday? So that's an interrogative technique you cannot use with a boss. What can you use? Number one, you can use rhetorical questions. What are rhetorical questions? Rhetorical question is when you ask a question, pause and not expect an answer. Because let's take a simple test. Don't think of a monkey. The moment I say that, a monkey comes in your mind, and that is rhetoric. So you can do questions like, boss, going back to the same situation, that boss, this is an approval for increasing profit in a new market. Pause. And now the boss is thinking about that new market. That new market is Vietnam. We never sanction any approval or headcount for that market. Pause again. Now, there's the second technique. When you're pausing, you're allowing the person to think, reflect. Now, when the brains are aligned, you use another questioning technique. I call them leading questions. You lead them. Boss, Vietnam is a market which was approved and decided in the board meeting that we will invest. Now, how should we do it without putting a headcount in place? So you're leading the boss to give you an approval by getting them to think slowly and steadily. Once you're done with the leading technique and the rhetorical, you come with the last one and potentially try to give an answer. So do you think if you can't approve two, maybe can we do one? I call this the option based questioning technique. So option A, option B. Don't give option three, because then the brain starts getting confused. So most of this work you need to do is very psychological. So if you use questioning, so only two things to remember: very smart questioning technique, and not the interrogative one. You can use the leading one, you can use the rhetoric one, and you can use the option based questions. When you use this three questioning technique along with the context, that is when you can remove the exertion of power dynamics, Vikas.
Nothing to add.
Thank you.
Uh, Firstly, I think because great question, so that prompted a even better answer. So, and this is needed in these kind of shows because this is live. So unless there is a question of the kind, we can't really tap into the mind of the guest. Um, so loving the questions that are coming. Let's take one question from Charu Siddiqui. How to address this situation when the other person in a difficult conversation turns silent or non-responsive? So very good question, I think, because
Yeah.
initially you did cover a situation where the person becomes emotional or charged or aggressive
Mm,
or those kinds, right? Which is quite often, quite common in corporate world,
mm,
particularly when it we have taken the person to the edge
mhm.
uh, for whatever reason. But this is also very common leading up to that people turn silent or non-responsive, completely quiet.
Yeah.
So what would you share with Charu for this?
No, no, that's very common, Charu, in Asia, I must say. And in fact, this I need to take you back to my story of coaching. When I learned coaching, obviously, coaching is a Western methodology, and one of the uh, principles about coaching is you don't tell an answer. You obviously keep asking questions. Now, when I started doing that with the Asian public, Indian, Chinese, sometimes they don't have a response, and they're like, "Why are you questioning me so much? Why are you driving me to the wall?" So sometimes just questioning does not work, and people go silent. Now, what do you do in such in cases? Now, when I had that problem, especially with the cultures which anyway don't speak much, the Hong Kong culture, clients I had, the Korean culture clients I had, the Japanese culture, these guys don't speak a lot, right? Obviously, I have some clients from the Western world. You ask one question, they don't stop talking. But here is the completely reverse. So the first thing I normally do when people get silent, I try to diagnose: is the person silent because the person is thinking, reflecting, or is the person silent because they don't have anything to say? They've hit a wall, right? Like a wall. So that is something you really need to diagnose. So normally there are two reasons when they go silent. They don't have anything to say, could be scared, or maybe their mind is not working, they hit a wall. Either way, they have gone quiet, or they're reflecting. In the first instance, when they're reflecting, please don't interrupt, especially if you're allowing that person to find a breakaway, or an outcome or an insight which can be very useful for him. Because these are two words I want to tell you which everyone should remember, especially if you're having development conversation with an employee or colleague: self realization. Self realization only comes when the person reflects. So, when that person is in the process of the reflection, please don't interrupt. And how do you know when the person reflecting? body language. You got to see what the body language is telling you. You got to trust your gut and then let the person reflect. So that's the first thing. Let them reflect and then allow them to go deep. If you think that's not needed at that point of time, you can slowly transition to a new topic, right? Or the topic you want to supplement. So that's the one category of people who go silent because they're reflecting, which is in most cases a good thing. The second category of people, when they go silent and they're non responsive because they hit a wall, whichever reason has taken them there, I use what I call the guru technique. What is the guru technique? I think Indians will love this technique. The guru's technique is tell a story, tell an analogy, tell a metaphor, tell an anecdote. So, in short, these are techniques to make it visual. So, I'll give you an example. So, often when people go silent and they go silent because they hit a wall, I tell them a story. So, there's a very interesting story I talk about, which is the practical take on, and I tell it in 1 minute just to save time. So, once upon a time, there was a boat, and three people were kind of going around in the boat in the middle of the ocean. Then suddenly there was a storm. Now one person gets up, okay, let's pray to God and everything will be okay. We call this person the optimist. Then we had second person who said, no, 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 we're gonna die. There's nothing to do, just take your prayers and we're gonna die. Pessimist. And the other person says, you fools, let's get up and row as fast as we can. We can see an island or we can find an island, we can save ourselves. The realist. So, what I just did is what I create a visual for you, and that will remove that wall which has got created in your brain of a boat of three people. One was an optimist, one was a pessimist, and one was a realist. And now I can take you back to reality. So, that's a good example of person who've hit a wall, make it visual with a story, with an anecdote, with a metaphor. And that should help you remove that silence in the room.
I'm sure it will. Thank you, Charu. Great question again. And I'm loving the audience today. So it's the Aalok effect. So people have fantastic questions. Anupreet Suryavanshi has a question around what mechanisms can be put in place to ensure that agreements and action plans resulting from difficult conversations are followed through effectively. So, of course, this question is more about what happens at the end of the difficult conversations, Alok. And we've had the conversation, you and I have agreed,
Yeah.
and I just get up and walk out. And how will you make sure, if you were the coach or manager in this situation, to make sure that this does not happen and there is actually some action?
Yeah. No, one of the things, Anupreet, which is a flaw, and by the way, that's a great question because I always say this line that any conversation without an outcome, without an action, is inconclusive. So, absolutely important to kind of do that. And that brings us to your specific question: what things you can put in place? Number one, I would ask you to keep writing throughout the conversation and make sure that you underline and highlight the words which you think can become actionables, because in any conversation you have, there are going to be three type of things which are spoken. One is information, data point, statistic, is just general information. The second is an insight. Oh, I should have done that. Oh, this is a great realization. They're having those aha moments, emotional insights sometimes. And the third one is what you can convert into action. Okay, I'm going to be practicing my presentation at least once a week so that I can be more effective, because the last board presentation was pretty bad. So that's an action. So try to kind of identify what is an information, what is an insight, and what is an action. Well, when I started doing that, first of all, I used to use four different color pens to do it, but then that became a little bit tricky. So now what I do is I kind of make circles like with an I, or with an action with an A. So I kind of do that. So find your process to do that. Once you've done that, it becomes super easy to conclude. So, two things to remember: summarize the point and get an agreement into the useful stuff. You know, in a conversation, sometimes 80-90% of the stuff is useless, dare I say. But then the useful stuff, which you think should become an action, get an agreement, get a mutual agreement first. Now that you have a mutual agreement, then you kind of summarize into next step or action plan. So get that. And immediately after, you go back, either that person or yourself, you put it documented down in an email or a form, so that that can be followed through. So if you done that, then you've kind of set up the foundation where those conversation will turn into results. So two things to do, Anupreet, every time you have that conversation: summarize and then translate into actions which are mutually agreed between the two of them, two of you.
Brilliant response, Alok. I think I was thinking, what would I say if this question was asked to me? And my answer would have been, the meeting is really not over till the action items are listed. So, so that is my practical, uh, way to look at it. And in many ways, that's what you said through your explanation, that it is actually not over till we have agreed on what is next. Many times people end the meeting thinking that, oh, we've climbed the emotional mountain and it's over. We are both friends again. But and I was trying to reflect on some of the meetings that I've had over the years where we both had an emotional roller coaster. We climbed the final mountain. We feel joy and elation. That job done. We are we are good friends now. But the crux of the matter is that the agreements that were made are still not recorded. So
Yeah,
tomorrow again the person can come back and say, "Oh, I thought you meant this," and I could say that, "No, no, I meant this, and I thought you were going to do this." So please be guarded against that. Is the summary of what Alok just shared. Alok, we are in the last 5 minutes, so I'm just trying to take as many questions I can get. And I think Dr. Rosanna
that's a
Huck
big one.
from the US. That's a big one, but it is mostly around compliments to how you conducted. Um, I think this. So this is more acknowledgement for your good work.
Compliment.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Rosanna. She's dialing in from the UK. I had seen one question which I just wanted to cover, but while I find that, you know, I ask this question to almost every guest: is that fine? We attended your 1 hour masterclass, and so two questions come out. One, I want to understand more about this topic. I don't want to pay. So how can I? Which books can I read, or what other resources can I consume? That is one. Second, assuming the person can pay, how do they reach out to you and make sure that or at least they can follow up and see whether there is a further relationship possible. So same question, but two ways to tackle it.
Sure. No, absolutely. Yeah. So, in terms of a book, uh, I read every day, but I want to make a controversial statement that reading books is actually the second lowest retention medium. And please go and Google if you have heard of what we call the learning retention pyramid, right? So let's do a quick test. All of you think about the book you last read and think about how many insights you remember. And therefore, you'll notice the trips and the techniques I share are very simple to remember, is in fact impossible to forget, because most of the books we read, they go in and go out. So I'm not a
Mm.
big fan of books, but if you do read, focus on quality, not the quantity which the internet is promoting because they want to sell books, right? I do see a lot of books over there. So again, big fan of writing. When you read a book, annotate, read a page and write what quality of reflection you have in the past and how can you use in the future. And this does not, by the way, apply to fiction books. If you read fiction, please read. It's more like therapy, tonic, like a movie entertainment. But if you're reading something like leadership or difficult conversation, please read one page and annotate and write and make that knowledge yours. So I want to say this very interesting thing, that science has a very big flaw. What's the flaw?
Mm,
The flaw is that every science is oversimplifying reality with the assumption that a million people sample applies to 7 or 8 billion people. It does not.
mm,
So the solution is you become your own scientist. You need to acquire the knowledge you get from a book, from an article, and then apply that. When you apply that, that is only when you'll know whether it works for you or not. So over
yeah,
the last 30 years of my working, I have picked up a lot of knowledge sources, but there's no guarantee it's going to work for me, right? So what I do is I kind of play with it, and when it does work, I turn it into my knowledge, my wisdom. And I journal almost on a daily basis that what did I learn today? How did this work? When I journal, that becomes original knowledge. And if you notice, everything I'm sharing with you is pure experience applied in my daily life. And that's why I'm not picking a memory. In fact, I don't get along very well with lecturers because they pick up memory, they pick up research. It's not often practical. It's often, and there's a phrase I always use, that school teaches you concept, I teach construct. What does that mean? School will teach you what is profit, I will teach you how to make the damn profit. So nothing after that. So I'm a pure application guy. So that's the thing about book. But since you mentioned a book, I this is one book everyone should read, whether you're doing difficult conversation or not. Is the game changer of your present digital age. It's called Building the Second Brain. That is
yeah,
something
go.
I'm trying to master. Building the second brain, what it is about all this knowledge which is around in the world with AI, with Google, is going to continue growing. But then how can you build your own knowledge source that is your own digital brain? And that's what something I've done over the last 15 years, which allows me to refer, and I know that is me, 100% of that digital stuff in that brain. And I use Evernote, I use day one, whichever app you want. I'm not advertising. Just make sure you learn how to organize your knowledge. When you do that, not only difficult conversation, everything will start becoming super easy. So that is my long answer to which book to refer. Building a Second Brain. Build yours, and life will be very different. Now, the short answer is how to reach me. Very easy. My name, alokgupta.com. That's one place to reach me. The second place is lsfglobal.com, the company I work for. That's the second place to reach me, or just Google me. You can find Aalok Gupta. Yes, I took a little bit of a hibernation from social media for 3 years, but thanks to Anshuman, I'm back now.
No, no, my pleasure that you're back, and this is one way we can remember each other. And while you were mentioning the book, Alok, for everybody else who's making notes about the book, the author is Tiago Forte, and fantastic author. He has quite a lot of videos as well. So if you are the video consumption type, you can watch that. But I also often recommend this book because this has really opened a new chapter. This kind of book has not been written earlier. It is not a rehash of any previous available knowledge. It is written for the current modern construct, like Alok used. Many of these things were not existing earlier.
Yeah.
So, with that, Alok, it is time, unfortunately, to end the conversation. Loved the 1 hour, almost 1 hour. I promised you under 1 hour, but it is almost an hour. But such is your wisdom and experience that we love talking to you, and quite possible that you will be the third or the third repeated guest on our show very soon. The compliments are pouring in. I will share with you separately. uh, so thank you once again to my audience as well for again joining. I took a small break as well, about a month after my 100th episode, a slightly well-deserved kind of break. So yeah, so good to have you back. And with that, we'll end the stream. Thank you, Alokji, and thank you once again, my audience. Bye bye.
Yeah. No, thank you, Anshuman. And before we close, I just want to
Sure.
tell everyone that please don't be scared of this whole AI thing going on. The future belongs to people with depth. Every information is going to be on your fingertips, whether you're having, but if you don't have the ability to be deep in one aspect, then it's going to be difficult, right? So whether it's having difficult conversation, whether it's emotional management, whatever, find your unique superpower, and I promise you, no AI can ever take away your jobs.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alok, and bye bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye bye. Thank you, Anshuman.